today and that they've crossed in the past as well. So really good to see you. And pastors and leaders in the Second Episcopal District of the CME Church, good to see you all. Some of your faces I recognize from when you would come to campus for the pastors conference that Phillips would put on each year in January that my friend Bishop Thomas would host during his time there. So I'm going to share now my screen with you, and give me just a moment here. Let me get this set up right. Hold on one second. We're going to pivot into a presentation. Let's see. Are you all seeing my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great, excellent. So we're gonna pivot into a presentation, and I hope this will be somewhat of a dialogue, because I do want you to be able to get some valuable takeaways from this presentation today. As Bishop Thomas said, I currently serve at Methodist Bonheur Healthcare. It's a health system related to the United Methodist Church based in Memphis, Tennessee. We have 6 hospitals in the metro Memphis area. We employ about 13,000 individuals. We have 102 primary care practices throughout the Mid-South, throughout the Memphis region. And in my role as Senior Vice President and Chief Mission Integration Officer, I'm largely responsible for all of our external programs through our system. So I'm responsible for all of the behavioral health service line, for fundraising, for spiritual care, for the CPE program. If anybody's interested in CPE, we have a very really good CPE program here at Methodist Bonheur Healthcare. I'm responsible for all of our community health initiatives, for anything related to chronic disease self-management. So all of our COVID responses that we're doing now, that falls under me. All of our programs related to diabetes management, all of the, anything related to chronic self-diseases, self-management of chronic diseases. And so it's a really broad division that I lead at Methodist. And so when Bishop Thomas reached out to me about being a part of this conversation today, I was really excited to be able to come on and to share with you from the perspective of clergy self-care. And I'll tell you, the talk today will be very practical. So I want to leave you with some really practical tips about how to care for yourself. And one of the interesting things, as we all know, I think everybody on the call, we're all ministers, we're all clergy. I used to hear people say all the time, barbers have the worst looking haircuts and carpenters have the worst looking houses. And so I thought about that. I said, well, clergy probably have the worst souls, because we spend all of our time looking after everybody else. And so today I want to try to change that narrative some and help you to think about clergy self-care, and particularly from the perspective that clergy self-care is not selfish. I mean, you have to care for yourself before you can care for other people. And so we're going to do a couple things. We're going to have a period where we're going to do a check-in. So we're going to do check-in, and a check-in is really important for you to know where you are at Methodist Healthcare. We have something called the mood elevator. And so the mood elevator, starts in the very basement level and it goes all the way to the top. And on the very top floor of the mood elevator is gratitude. At the very basement level, are the kinds of things that I think we all can identify with at times. And that's where we're complaining, where we're trying to figure out, who's doing what and why they're doing it. So we're going to do a check-in. And after doing a check-in, we're going to talk specifically about what pastors might be experiencing as we continue to wade through this, now almost a year of a pandemic. And then finally close out with some really practical tips for you. So I'll have 10 very practical tips for you. And as I said, we'd like for this to be conversational. So there'll be times when I will turn to you to hear from you what you have to say about this. So let's move on now with our check-in. So the check-in, I start with this slide here that raises a really, what seems to be a really simple question, but I think a really important question for us. What are you feeling today? And not just today. I found it very helpful for me in my own ministry and in my professional life, and even in my personal life, my family life, for me at the beginning of each day to try as best as I can to catalog where I am. How am I feeling? What am I feeling today? Because what we sometimes forget about is that the mood that we find ourselves in will almost inevitably impact how we interact with others, how others perceive us. And so, for example, if I wake up feeling exhausted and tired, because I didn't rest well, or I had a lot of things on my mind, I'm probably going to be irritable as I'm engaging with other people throughout the course of the day. And some people might assume that that's related to them. They may say, well, what did I do to him to make him that way? And it's not necessarily anything that they did to me. It's really just what I'm feeling and experiencing myself. So I want to pause for a second and ask you if you're, and part of it is us being candid, open, and honest about where we are, and and sort of being able to name and claim our own feelings. So looking at this particular slide here, where would you place yourself today? How are you feeling today? What are you feeling today? Let's take a moment or two and give a couple of folks an opportunity to respond to that.
Today, I'm feeling good.
All right, I think that was Kimberly saying today you're feeling good. Great. Others, anyone else would like to chime in and kind of give us a sense of where you're on this scale?
Hopeful.
I would say today I'm feeling very tired.
Okay, very tired.
Today I'm feeling very hopeful.
Very hopeful. I like that.
Very hopeful.
Great.
I'm sorry, what was that? Great?
Yes, I feel great.
Excellent.
I feel happy.
Happy?
Yeah.
Overwhelmed.
Overwhelmed.
Today
I have two feelings. I feel exhausted and hopeful.
Exhausted and hopeful. And
hopeful and hungry.
Hopeful and hungry.
Today I feel
Speaking of feeling hungry, I have one that I share with my family often. It's a combination between hunger and anger, and I call it hangry. I say to them, all right, I'm getting hangry now, so you might not want to deal with me now. And so my wife and others usually know in our family that, if I identify as hangry, it's time to kind of, for me to kind of be in my own space and not to be around others. Others of you, how are you feeling?
Okay,
Today
it's
I
not
feel
on there,
good.
but I am feeling, I just feel good. Okay.
Feel good. Okay.
I feel re-energized.
Re-energized.
I feel anxious.
Anxious. And it's important for us to name these feelings, and for us as particularly as pastors and clergy, to be able to step away, as I said a few moments ago, for us to be able to step away and to do really an analysis of where we are. And I know, there are all these images of what pastors and clergy should be. I remember when I was pastoring a church in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, I'd served a fairly large church in the city, historic African-American United Methodist Church, with about 1,500 members. And one of the first things I did when I went to that church is I said to my leadership team there, the church council, I said to them that, I'm your pastor. I have the same problems you have. I have the same issues you have. I have family issues like you have. I have, personal issues like you have. I got financial issues like you have. I've got the same kinds of problems you have. So just as you asked me to pray for you, I want you to pray for me. And I remember when I went there, I established, I made it, it's not a part of our official board in the United Methodist Church, but I said, I want, as a part of my official board, I want a prayer council. I want some people who I know are going to pray for me, and not people, sometimes people tell you they're praying for you. I saw this funny thing on Facebook one day where when a Black person tells you they're praying for you, that when they say it to you right then and there, that's the prayer. I'm praying for you. That's the prayer. They're not going to literally go and pray for you. So, but it's important for us to be able to name where we are and to be able to share our emotions with others. So let's move on here. Let me move on now to the next one. So reacting to your feelings. And so, as pastors and clergy, oftentimes we find it very difficult to react to our feelings, just as we find it difficult at times to name our feelings. And so given the, sort of the sustained period of this pandemic now, I imagine most, if not all of you, have gone through periods where you've had both fear and worry not only about your own health, but also about the health of your loved ones. You've been worried about whether or not you're going to contract this virus, and whether or not some of your loved ones will contract it. You may have experienced changes in your sleep or eating patterns. I'll be honest with you and say to you, I've had a lot of trouble sleeping in the past year, largely because my hours at work have been really sporadic and have been, sort of changing all the time, but also because I do worry. My wife and I, we have 4 kids, but two sons who are in their 20s, and I don't care how much we try to impress upon them the significance of this virus. They want to hang out with their friends. They want to go and be with their friends, and they're smart because whenever they pull up in the driveway, they always have a mask on. They have their mask on in the car when they pull up in the driveway. But I've said to my wife, I'm pretty sure they're not wearing those masks when they're around their friends. They do that because they know we're going to say something to them if they don't have it on when they pull up. Perhaps people are worried about chronic health conditions they have worsening during this pandemic. And one of the things that we've seen, and you all probably have read and heard a lot about this too, is that unfortunately, there's been an increased use of substances. People have increased, substance abuse has increased so much during the pandemic because people are isolated, they're in their homes, they're all alone, and they find themselves turning to things that they think will provide comfort and care for them. So let's move on. So we're talking about, we did a check-in, just to kind of get a feeling for where you are. Now I want to talk more specifically about where pastors might be themselves during this time, during the pandemic, and what pastors might be feeling. I've got an image here to kind of demonstrate what's happening now. I mean, if you are recording services and you're broadcasting them on Zoom or YouTube or Facebook or wherever, more than likely you're doing that in an empty sanctuary. And that's very different and very new for us. And so there are a lot of feelings that we may be experiencing from this. And while we've been doing this for several months now, for more than several months actually, how many of us have actually stopped to process what we're feeling as a result of this? We're as pastors and as clergy, we're used to being before God's people. We're used to standing before God's people. We're used to talking and sharing with the congregation. We have not been able to do that for the most part for about 9, 10, 11 months now. And so some of what you may be feeling, I've listed here a couple of things, and I want us to pause and have some conversation about this. And I want you to weigh in and just tell me if in fact this is where you find yourself. A lot of it has to do with kind of the, accepting the reality of the loss that we've gone through for the past 9, 10, 11 months or so. We've had kind of almost a loss of identity as a spiritual caregiver. We've had a loss of the rituals that we perform. If you stop and think about it, many of the rituals that we perform define us as pastoral leaders. The funerals, the weddings, and even the weekly worship experience that we lead from the sanctuary behind the pulpit. I mean, that's a ritual that we perform, and we've had a loss of that. We're now, and I heard Dr. Earl talking about this when I jumped on earlier. We find ourselves now sitting in like we're doing today. I mean, we're sitting in our studies or in our living rooms or in our dens, and we're leading worship from those places now. And while we know we can worship God from anywhere, there has been, I believe, sort of a decrease in, at least from my perspective, in the sense of awe and the sense of holiness that we experience when we walk into the sanctuary, when we walk into what we know to be a sacred and a holy space. We haven't been able to do that for 9, 10, 11 months now. And the ability to honor and grieve in funeral practices that are common to our tradition. We had a very close family member that passed away in our family about 2 months ago, and this is one of my aunts, and she was a leader in her local church in Mississippi, a strong leader in her church. We had to have a graveside service, and 2 months ago we were sort of at the height of the pandemic in Mississippi, and I know. That if she were alive to see that, I mean, she was grateful for I'm sure she's grateful for what happened, but she spent her life in that church. She spent her life building that church up, and to gather at the grave, at a graveside service, with about 10 people, it just did not speak to her life completely. We've experienced a loss of our holiest times and seasons together. So you think about, just go back to 2020, how we had to do Advent so differently, how we even had to do Easter differently in 2020. Back in April of 2020, we couldn't even gather for Easter, and how we've lost that sense of koinonia, that sense of fellowship. And this last one is a very real one. A lot of churches were struggling before the pandemic financially in terms of, being able to pay conference claims, being able to pay apportionments, being able to raise the offerings that you need to raise. And now even more so as a result of the pandemic. So let's pause for just a moment and give you an opportunity to chime in and to speak to the reality of some of these losses from your perspective. Someone wrote in the chat room, adding to this the pain of losing church and family members. Perhaps you'd like to speak to that, because I know in a lot of scenarios, in a lot of settings, a lot of churches have been hit really, really hard.
Yeah, Pastor Mosley, my pastor had been my father as well, and we lost him during this pandemic. And he was well known throughout this district. Not being able to grieve that and deal with the church the way that we need to. In addition, we lost some other church members before, and some other things that had gone on. We're losing family members as well. And we're losing them at a rate where we're not able to process this. So we have to take time to figure out how to process this.
Thank you, Pastor Atkins. That's a very, it's a very real experience that we're all going through. I'll share with you all that in our health system here, due to COVID, since this pandemic began in March in earnest for us here in Memphis, we've lost more patients to COVID in a matter of 9, 10, 11 months than we have lost to diseases like cancer or heart attacks or any of the other kind of severe illnesses that people experience. And one of the things that we've done here in our system, because we know that families have not been able to gather and to grieve in the manner that they are accustomed to, we've actually hosted a number of services, virtual services, for the family members of patients who've died in our health system from COVID. And I'm going to tell you, a lot of the people who work in these COVID units, the nurses, the physicians who work in these COVID units, they are beginning to share with us their experiences of something called vicarious trauma, secondary trauma. So, we have, there's this thing called regular trauma that we experience as a result of going through something that is very painful to us in our lives. But for individuals who are witnessing the trauma, who are seeing the deaths happen on such a rapid pace, imagine if you're working in one of those settings and you come into work every night, 4, 5, 6, 7 people are dying a night on your unit. That's very difficult and hard for you to process. And as you've expressed here already, there are pastors and church leaders who've witnessed this in their own specific settings. Others of you who'd like to chime in and share here.
I would, this is Reverend James Fleming. I would like to say, visiting of the elderly. My census in my church is majority seniors, and some of them are in nursing homes and things like that. Not able to visit. You can go by and stand outside the door and different things like that, but that's the only visitation that some will ever receive is from their pastors or their family members, and unable to be able to go out and just visit. Phone calls are great, but in person is a little more of a touch that I miss. I miss that a lot. And it's taken a toll on me because I drive 180 miles one way just to be around my church family. So it's kind of tough not being able to see them physically.
Well, thank you, Reverend Fleming, for sharing that. And there were 1 or 2 responses to that in the chat box, dittoing what you're saying. We have in our family, the matriarch of my family is my father's oldest sister, who's 98 years old. She lives in Jackson, Mississippi. Before the pandemic started, she lived alone. She drove. She In fact, she has a big old Lincoln Town Car that she drives, and stalwart member of Anderson United Methodist Church in Jackson, one of our large Black churches in that conference there, and cooked meals every day, did everything on her own, took herself to the beauty parlor to get her hair done once a week, went to church every Sunday, grocery shop, all of that. When this thing started in March, we were all very concerned about her, and she's actually, she was a nurse in her career, so she's a retired nurse, so she kind of felt like she had a handle on everything. But by the time we got to May and June, because her routine was thrown off, her ritual of getting up, on Thursday night, she would start laying out her clothes and her outfit for church on Sunday, and she was by far the sharpest person in the whole church. I mean, she would start on Thursday night laying it out. But because she wasn't going to church on Sundays, she was unable to do her own grocery shopping, unable to go out to get the things done that she wants to get done. Her days started blending together. And we got to May, June, July, we had to move her in with my sister because she became so confused because her whole ritual was thrown off. And so Reverend Fleming, to sort of, to your point, particularly for seniors in our churches and everyone else as well, but particularly for seniors in our churches, things have just become even more difficult for them. And my prayer and hope is that, because we went home to visit her last weekend, she seems to be doing just fine, but I don't know if after this thing, if there is an after this thing, if she'll bounce back to where she was before. Physically, she's perfectly fine. She can walk, she can do all the things that she needs to do, but days are blending together in her mind. And she can't tell Friday from Saturday or from Monday or Tuesday because it's the same thing every day now. She's not going out. She's not going to the places that she was accustomed to going to. And that takes a toll on an individual. Others of you who'd like to offer anything here in this particular point, talking specifically about what pastors may be experiencing during this time?
Yes, this is Reverend Gober. I am not pastoring at the moment, but I work with the youth at Lampkin's Chapel CME Church in Louisville, Kentucky. And one of the difficult things is not being able to be with the youth and talk to them on a daily basis and see them face to face, especially knowing that being able to be with them on a Sunday for an hour or so is really the only opportunity that we really had to get together. And then we would have opportunities to meet during the week, but not being able to be there with them. I know that they're being exposed to more worldly and more secular things now. And we did start a Zoom call with them, but due to the fact that most of them are working now and things like that, it's hard to get to them. So for me, it's just difficult because I don't want them to lose out on the fellowship that they have with one another and grow with one another, because I'm afraid that when it's all said and done, they're going to feel like they don't have to come back because of them growing accustomed to not coming any longer and not being able to meet on Zoom or any other outlet at this time.
Yeah, thank you, Brother Gober, for that. That's a really real concern. And again, I'm a very transparent person, so I'll tell you, my wife and I and our two younger kids, we try as best as we can to hop on for virtual worship every Sunday. We miss being in person with people. And I said to my wife the other day, I said, when and if we kind of get beyond this, what will it be like to go back? What will it be like to go back? And unfortunately, for a lot of our churches, because they don't have the expertise in terms of the technology, the virtual experience has been really horrible. I'm gonna be honest with you. The church that we attend here in Memphis, I mean, I get on because I feel like that's what we should do, but it's a really horrible experience. I mean, the technical challenges are just ever present. The pastor, God bless his heart, he doesn't know when to mute the mic. And so when he's not supposed to be speaking, we hear him talking in the background to everybody else and fussing and carrying on. And so Reverend Rowe, I think you've got your hand up. Let's turn to you.
Yeah, us Pastor Rowe of Copeland Chapel CME Church. One of the things that I've seen just with me having a smaller church that the people that I used to depend on to get things done at church, what the COVID, they're not coming to the church, or they're not doing what I would say with their duties of as the trustees and things of making sure that the grounds are kept or the inside of the church is clean. So I find that I have to, me and my ministerial staff have to come in earlier to do the things that they used to do. And we're still hoping that they might even show up, even though they're not doing the duties of that are assigned to them. And we know that with us doing the Facebook and the in-house, we're getting more Facebook viewers than we are in-house viewers. And it's just being able to balance that. But I think it's more pressure on the pastor. As one of the other pastors said, the visits to the hospitals that you can't do. We have a lady that's 90 years old, but she is the mother of the church. She's been there 60 years. And if I open the doors, she's going to try to come in. You know, sometimes it's just us thinking about her health,
right,
and being careful.
Yeah,
that's all I had to say.
Thank you, Reverend Rowe. Is it Eulalia?
My name is Eulalia, but I go by
Eulalia.
Ann Ross.
Okay, all right.
Eulalia. I'm from the 8th Episcopal District. Dr. Horn invited me, and I'm glad she did. What I want to say is the thing that I miss is the ability to grieve at funerals. We had a member who did, I can literally say he almost owned that church. He put so much money in it because when I got there, was only one man and 6 or 7 women, and he died. And the family only let 10 people come to the gravesite. But I was the only person there from my church because everybody's older. And they didn't want to come because they have a sincere fear of this COVID-19 and as well as our bishop. But in addition to that, you know, I missed the fellowship at the church. And now we're struggling with our financial goals in terms of paying our budgets, because we used to have programs where people would attend and our churches would assess each of their groups X amount of dollars. And sometimes it's hard to get people to give when there's no program, even though people have been given, and we've been paying our budget for 5 or 6 years. And now I know this year we're not going to make it.
Yeah, those are very, very real concerns. And that's why I think it's important for us to be able to name them and to have these conversations like this. As I said at the beginning, oftentimes as pastors and as religious leaders, for whatever reason, we want to sort of to give off an air of strength and to show to people that somehow we're stronger than everyone else, and that, you know, we're doing just fine. But it's really important for us to acknowledge where we are, to name the reality of the loss that we've experienced. You know, I thought about this. You know, teachers and a lot of other professions have gone through quite a bit during this pandemic and have lost so much of their identity. But when you really stop and think about it, what group has lost more of their identity than any other group? I think it's pastors. I mean, our identity has been tied to the rituals that we do. They've been tied to gathering God's people on a weekly basis for corporate worship. They've been tied to these types of things, and we haven't been able to do that. And very, very few of us have really stopped to process what that means for us. So I want to move on now to one other thing, and that is processing the pain of grief itself. And we are caregivers. As pastors, we're caregivers. And caregivers tend to minimize their own losses. That's what we tend to do. We tend to minimize our own losses. But we have to find avenues to process our grief. Most of us, we feel some resistance to this task, and that's very common for clergy. And so sharing among colleagues is really, really important for us. You know, creating that safe space where we share with one another. So I'll tell you something that often sort of cripples us from that. Now, in the United Methodist Church, and I imagine it's very similar in the CME Church and AME and AME Zion as well, you know, we're all connectional churches, and we're all appointed by our bishops to serve. We all belong to conferences and that type of thing. In the United Methodist Church in particular, I've noticed that people are very reluctant to, you know, so we have what we call the Order of Elders. And so those of us who are elders in full connection, we meet and we're supposed to kind of share with one another and be open with one another and talk about where we are in our spiritual journeys. Very seldom have I ever heard an elder in the order of elders speak of a weakness or speak of a challenge that they're facing. Very seldom have I heard anyone be honest about that. We always want to present an image of strength. We always want to talk about what's going right, the growth that we're experiencing in our churches and those types of things. And part of the reason why we don't allow ourselves to be honest and vulnerable about where we are is because we know the reality of it. And it's the same, I'm sure, in the CME church. We know the reality of it, that if, we fear that if word gets out that I'm challenged, that I have a challenge or that I'm struggling in some way, then that might inhibit my next appointment or something. But here's what happens. People are struggling. They have issues. They've got challenges. They keep it to themselves. They don't seek the help they need to seek. And they go on to the next appointment, to the next church, or the bigger church, or whatever they might think the better church, and they take those problems with them. And God's people suffer as a result of that. God's people suffer as a result of it. I want to move on now. I think I'm trying to keep myself on a timer here. I believe, Bishop Thomas, I got about 7 minutes, about 5 minutes, if I'm looking at my timer right here. So I want to give you some very practical tips. 10 practical tips. I'm one of these kind of folks who likes practicality. So I want to give you 10 practical tips for clergy self-care. And in doing so, doing this from the perspective and the understanding that clergy care is self-care and self-care is not selfish. So we got to move away from that thinking that self-care is selfish. When you take care of yourself, you're not being selfish. You're doing what God wants you to do. And when you really stop and think about it, how can you care for your family? How can you care for your parishioners? How can you care for others that you're charged to care for if you yourself are not taken care of? You got to care for yourself also. And so, and I'm very adamant about that with my staff and with people that I interact with. That I'm gonna make sure that I'm good first. I'm gonna do the things that I need to do. I'm gonna, if it means running in the morning, if it means having extra time for prayer and reflection, I'm going to do that first, because I can't come to you as an empty vessel and offer anything to you. I can't do that. I can't come to you as an empty vessel and offer anything to you. So 10 practical tips, 10 tips for pressing the way forward, tying into our theme for today. The first one is to stay connected. Stay connected. One of our deepest wells for mental and spiritual health is the experiences and conversations we have with each other. So if nothing else, and I know you've probably been doing this, but if you haven't been doing it, I want to encourage you to do it. Reach out to each other, even if you have to do it virtually and one-on-one. Make sure you tap into those wells that you have around you. Talk to the people that help to lift you up. Do that as often as you need to do it. Step number 2, ask good questions. So try to move beyond the usual, how are you doing? I mean, that's, how are you doing? It's a good question, but it's just too ordinary. And be more specific when you're checking in on people. Ask them questions like, what have the last few days been like for you? What have the last few weeks been like for you? What have the last few months been like for you? How's it affecting you? What's been the hardest part about all of this for you? Allow people an opportunity to express where they are. And I'm gonna send this presentation to Reverend Gibson, to Ian, and hopefully he can forward it on to all of you so you can have this information. Number 3, give caring answers. And so as pastors and clergy, we're kind of accustomed to being a non-anxious presence. We're accustomed to that. We're accustomed to being the people that the other folks like to talk to, and we're accustomed to responding with empathy when people speak to us. And so, even more so now, because of what our parishioners and our church members are feeling, we've got to be able to acknowledge their feelings and to help people understand that what they're experiencing might be normal. It's a normal reaction to a very abnormal event. And sometimes it just helps, it helps to hear someone else say that. It helps to hear someone else acknowledge that what you're feeling is not out of the ordinary. The next one here is getting organized. Make a schedule for your day to reduce your own uncertainty and anxiety. And when you make that schedule, make time for things like exercise. Make time for things like prayer, time for things like emails. Because a lot of people are working from home now. One of the interesting things about it is that we find ourselves, and I try not to do this, but we find ourselves blending our personal time with our work time. Now I'm working, I'm still working at my office, but a lot of my staff are working remotely. And I find people sending me emails at, 11:30, 12 o'clock at night. And I'm thinking, I'd get up and read it the next morning. I'm like, why were you up sending an email to me that time of night? Like, you've got to set a schedule. You've got to say, this is the time I'm going to do this, and this is the time I'm going to do that. And when you set that schedule, build in time. You got to be intentional about this. Build in time for prayer. Build in time for exercise. And it doesn't have to be anything. I run, as I've said a couple of times, I run in the mornings. My wife does this thing she puts on this thing on YouTube where she does this walking program with this woman that you're supposed to walk 2 miles in 30 minutes or something like that. But whatever it takes, it doesn't have to be anything doesn't have to be exactly like that, but something that you are doing to care for yourself and organize your day around it. All right, so let's see. We got some responses here. Caring answers and getting organized, building time in prayer. The next one is to be creative. There's some great ideas out there, and you've probably seen some of them. You got to be able to respond to individual preferences. So this is more for your congregation. Know your people and what sort of conversations and activities speak to them the most. And I think as pastors, most of us tend to know our people. We know what our congregation likes. We know what they don't like. Some of them, if this pandemic were happening 10 years ago when I was serving in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania at the church that I mentioned earlier, it was a largely elderly congregation. It was a very large church, but a lot of elderly members. I could not have done Zoom with them. We couldn't have done Zoom worship experiences because they weren't on the computer. I would have had to figure out some other kind of way to connect with them that's meaningful to them. Next one is for you to get quiet, to find a space for you to meditate and to engage in what we call mindfulness. And many of you have probably heard about this practice of mindfulness. Mindfulness is simply an experience or an exercise where you basically steal away from the noise and away from everyone else, and you meditate and think about what you believe God is speaking, is saying and speaking to you. But we've got to be really intentional about it. Get smart. So there's bound to be a lot of bad and anxiety-inducing information out there. I mean, we've seen some of the crazy stuff that's on the internet, that's on TV. Follow the experts. Listen to what the CDC says. Listen to what the World Health Organization says. Listen to what the National Institutes of Health says. Don't follow the advice of some of these quack people who are saying you don't need to wear a mask or you don't need to social distance. As we all know, this pandemic has hit our community harder than any other community. It has hit us very, very hard. So we've got to be smart and follow the advice that we see from professionals in the field. The next one is, if you got feelings, talk about them. Ask about them. Sometimes people are hesitant to speak about their feelings, and that's okay. But we've got to get in a place where we can find a safe space with people that we know love us, people that we know care for us, and people that we know have our best interests at heart, and share our feelings with them. Know when to team up. Know when you need help. Know when you need to call upon other people, and when you can't do it all by yourself. We've got to sort of get rid of the sort of hero persona that a lot of pastors carry around with them, and reach out for help when we need it. And the last one of these is to know when to tag out. Friends, if this is the only thing you remember today, you've got to remember when to give yourself a break. That passage that we've been reflecting upon from the Gospel of Mark, think about what Jesus did in that passage. It says that Jesus got up very early in the morning and went off to a place by himself where no one else was to pray. And to show you how the cycle of life works, when we do that, when we go off by ourselves to pray, we get off into those spaces alone. Trust you me, the people will find you. They're going to come and find you. So that's why it's important for you to carve out that time so that you can stay charged up to help others. And this is, this is the best for you, and it's the best for other people as well. And so I'm going to stop there. I think I have, I've exhausted my time. Somebody put in here in the chat room. Yes, her name is Leslie Sansom. You're right, the walking lady. That's who my wife listens to every morning. So if you want to go on, you can go on YouTube or someplace like that and find her. You do that walk in your living room, in your den, wherever your TV is, and you can you walk at your own pace with her for about 30 minutes. But I'm going to stop here and stop screen share and see if there are any closing thoughts or any questions or remarks for me, Bishop, as we turn it back over to you.
Any comments, questions, or take a couple of minutes to speak with Dr. Mosley? Bishop Lakey?
Dr. Mosley, this is Maisha. I'm one of the chaplains at our #1 trauma center. And I just wanted to say thank you for presenting this on clergy self-care. I intentionally do this quite often. So our department won't, I guess, fall into compassion fatigue or burnout. And one thing, as I'm practicing those intentionally, I'm aware that when you said with number 8, I have to be mindful of who I talk to about who can handle some of the trauma that I see. So I think also for me, what I'm practicing or discovering is person's limitations.
Yeah. Maisha, good to see you. I remember you from your days at ITC.
Good to see you too.
Yeah.
I think Bishop Lakey was about to say something. Unmute, Bishop. Unmute. Unmute, Bishop Lakey. Bishop Lakey, unmute.
Yes.
Okay.
Is there anyone helping churches with Zoom worship? I experienced what Dr. Mosley said he experienced. It's kind of bland. The brothers and sisters don't quite know what they're doing. Is there any professional, I guess that's the best term, what is anybody helping us